All right. I am here today to do. I got some writing to do on this thing. I was originally, thinking I would do more of my sat solver on Friday, or try to do another fun project. But I also just kind of going with whatever feels unstressful to me. And right now, it feels good is filling in some of the content on this prototype I'm building. Uh, I'm not going to be doing as much of the like programming of the story engine kinds of stuff that I do, or building up big features of the engine. I'm just going to be kind of playing through the system and adding in new content. And if anyone watching, wants to chat about things while I'm doing that, for now, that sounds good too. But I've just been feeling good about putting stuff into the system and sort of testing it out lately, and that feels like that feels like something I can do without having to push myself into doing it, which is why I'm doing it here on Friday afternoon in this hangout for fun stream kind of situation. So let's just start with let me show you how this thing looks these days. So it starts off looking like this. Immediately, this reminds me when I see this that um, I need to do something different. I have an issue where when I work on this on my laptop, the colors are totally different, and I don't know if it's the fact that this screen is poorly calibrated or the laptop screen is poorly calibrated. But one of them is off because on the laptop screen you can't see the highlight on these things until you hover them, and the colors look totally different. Like this looks much darker, this looks much darker, these all look darker. So the fact that they're dark, I mean, if you were gonna think of it as an sRGB bug that's like only sRGB working on this and not on that, then the guess would be that it's not doing the sRGB to linear, or rather, the linear to sRGB isn't happening. Is what I mean to say. But I don't think that's it. It's probably not that, but I haven't actually investigated it. But anyways, let's look at what the game contains. So it starts off with this. There's some issues here that are like engine stuff. So like, I'd love to get the center. Probably something I'll do on Monday. But you start off and you hear about this uh, town of Deriba, and you are arriving there, and this is where your adventure takes off. This is where the story of your adventure really takes off. You see this welcome sign. And you get this initial choice to get lodging at the inn or to visit a tavern and talk with some locals for a while. So that's cool, and I can show you through how some of this is built up pretty well, so you can find your way. It tells you about the how the town of Deriba is set up for travelers with these signs that help you find your way around, and you visit the innkeeper, and he says you can take a room, and he'll charge you. There's some engine issue here where it doesn't actually give you a way to know how much you have. This would be something that would happen earlier in the flow if I had the engine features to kind of put it in the way I want. But it should start to introduce you to the idea of like a character sheet. We don't have that yet, but you have enough money at this point to take the room if you want. And so we do that when we wake up. And then there's no content for any of this. Might be fun to try to build content for some of that. Now we can do any of these things. We could go to the tavern, and it's like nothing happens there. We can go to the inn, then we get back to where there's some content again. So what I'd like to do for now is fill in some content here and there, but there's another thing I'd like to do, which is I might sort of be pushing the engine. So there's two different ways to develop something. You can get to a point where you want to add a new piece of content, and the engine is underpowered in a certain way. Like there's some way that the engine doesn't quite make it easy or convenient to add what you want to add. And you have a choice. You can either think about how to upgrade the engine so that it can so that it has better tools and options for capturing the thing you wanted to add. Or you can sort of like take the less easy route, to just brute force, take what the engine gives you as if that's as good as it's going to get, and just do the brute force work of building your thing into it. And there's some stuff here. So like here, there are some options. Now that's not what I thought it would do. Something might be a little off. Let me go and check. Let me go and check that first. What happens when we arrive in town? We arrive in town. We go into the evening graph here. So we're choosing to to go to the inn or to go to the tavern. One button I'm missing that I should have on that first screen where I make a decision about going to the inn or tavern is I should also be able to choose to camp outside of town. So let's go add that actually. While I'm just fleshing out the content and chilling, that's a good option. So that is in arrive in town, like the string, which is incomplete in a couple spots. This is where I have some engine stuff missing that would make it possible to lay this out and introduce your inventory to you and tell you a little bit about your character backstory and stuff. But let's take a quick detour from what I was telling you about to do this. And that would look like that. Now the other issue was, it seemed like we weren't getting the arrive in the tavern text at all. Tavern. Ah, right. That would be why. I was, last time I was working on this, I sort of left this in a half broken state. There should be actually a dead end at the arrive in tavern, because I was going to start building out the tavern flow a little more, and I haven't done that yet. So that's the other thing I want to work on. And then once I've built that out, I want to go back and fix some stuff, because there's some ways about details about how I chose to build this that I don't want to keep. Nice. So I now have these options. I can go straight to camping. Zig side roads to the outskirts of town, looking for a patch of land suitable to pitch your tent. There is plenty of wild lands. There is plenty of wild land. Couple of other tents. Okay. So let's go and look at the tavern string here. I'm going to slide this over so I have more room. And actually, I'm going to do something else. Let's go. Now, where's the. Okay, user. Go to user directory, config, line wrap. Let's turn off line wrapping and I'll relaunch ForCoder here. That's just going to mean that now if I have text over here, it won't wrap. I have I'm doing this thing where if I'm writing, I expand the right-hand side a little bit so I can get longer lines. It's a little bit nicer. We'll set the length to max out about there, I think. Okay. Yeah, so this is where I wanted to pick up for now. I'm gonna do it this way. This also ties into a part of where I wanted to kind of change up how I'm doing things, or think about. I don't want to change up how I'm doing things today, but I want to. This is where I might do some of the brute forcing for now, but I also need to kind of just analyze the structure of this chapter 1 stuff, and maybe see if there's anything to learn from looking at that. All right. So I want to do. Well, also let's look at yeah, we want to look at this. Hi, Steffi Sat. All right, I'm gonna read your question. I'm interested in how you go about producing a narrative. Seeing as how you are a programmer, perhaps there is a systematic approach to your writing as well. I don't know. So I'm not a writer, and I haven't written something before that I've shared. At least it's been a long time. I used to maybe write like background stories for games that I was making when I was younger, or things like that. So I did a little bit of writing, but not anything that um, was ever at the scale of this, or anything that I stuck to for very long. Like, this is about as serious as I've ever gotten about writing something, and I'm kind of in the process of learning it now. With that said, um, well, there's a couple of funny things, right? So I'm writing this story, or this interactive story, for the purposes of testing out my ideas about story engines. So I'm not too precious about the narrative itself, um, which I think helps. Like, if I was a more serious writer, in the sense that I was a person who'd really worked on the craft and was then attempting to use it for some particular effect, um, I don't, then I'd be in a very different place, and I'd have a very different amount of like weight to my how carefully I think about what I'm doing. But here I'm more so just thinking, as I'm adding elements to the narrative, does this help me with my plan of pushing the story engine? And so I don't have much more than that I have to worry about in terms of a quality bar. Um, the other thing is, I wouldn't say it's particularly systematic. It's more gradually uncovered, like a creative process kind of thing. So, I mean, I am a programmer, which is true, and so I do know how to build things that are a system, right? And by a system, when I say that, what I mean is like that follows a sort of strict procedure or set of rules. But I don't really think that that's how writing has been. It's a lot of the progress that I've made on like my plan for what I'm writing here has come at completely random times. Almost like, you know, in like those TV shows when you got like House, or some character is puzzled, and then they see somebody playing with a toy or doing some random thing that gives them an idea. Like, it's like it's like they get these ideas at random times from somebody doing something that's like a weird metaphor for the idea that they're going to have in the narrative. That's not like that realistic all the time, but there is a certain truth to the idea that like sometimes ideas come to you randomly for no reason. I do a lot of stuff to like make space for that. So like going for walks, changing in my environment and stuff. But none of that is particularly systematic. Most of it just kind of is like when I feel that a certain direction has feels good, I build out in that direction. And when I had a narrative that I was sort of thinking about for the 7-day version of this prototype, and when I was done, there was just lots of it that it didn't that like I was like, I just don't really want to keep building on this stuff, and so I wasn't precious about it. I am happy to just throw away stuff because it doesn't feel good, and I think that that's more. It's more of a feeling it out. It's more of an intuition side that kind of thing. So I don't know. I don't know if that helps answer your question, but that's what writing seems like to me, especially with like the world building kind of stuff. That since this is interactive fiction, I'm not just like sitting and writing a narrative and crafting like, ooh, this is this is the arc I want to give. It's more like I'm world building, and I'm allowing for multiple arcs inside that world to occur. So there's not even like, yeah, there's not even like a specific final structure I have to pick for a narrative here. With that said, like it's not like I think I've done a particularly good job. It's just serves a key purpose of testing out the technology that I'm putting it into. Okay, so this grabs that, makes the move. Okay. Let me use the reject move there. Okay. So what I've got here is I can make 3 different choices, and what I want to go and do now is here in the evening graph, when you arrive at the tavern, let's build out these states here. So yeah, this isn't quite right yet. Let me roll this back, do it like this. There we go. All right, and then okay. Okay. So I gotta decide how I want this to work. So the idea here is that whatever you do, you end up having to buy something. So if you buy the ale or the spirits, there should be a different price. That's why we have 2 different prices here. And so I have to apply that rule. But then whichever thing you buy, it's more like, it's not that it takes you into a different state. These should both take you into the same state. So let's go and plan out like whatever you buy. And there's going to be a third option that's just not here in the story yet, but is in other iterations of this part of the story. So arrive in taverns, we're going to have we'll call this the stay in the tavern section. And whichever one of these you do, we should just make this the tavern, maybe tavern option. I'm not sure. But each of these options, and this is where things start to get weird. I'm not going to overthink it. We're just going to attach the varieties here. Let's go with that. And so if you are in the arrive at tavern state, you can get to the stay at tavern state if you do one of the purchases. And so there's a path from the arrive at tavern state to the stay at tavern state through the tavern move. And there's a path from the arrive at tavern state to the arrive at inn state through the inn move and to the camp outside from the camp move. We'll do it that way, I guess. Yeah, I feel like the answer is so I have this puzzle that I'm working on in this system about how I'm going to structure this. Because there are things now about it that are starting to feel off. Up until this part of it, it feels good, but this part feels off, and I'm starting to think that maybe this does not belong in the story graph system. But again, that's more of the programming thinking. Not in the mood for that, just here to fill in some writing to flesh this out, put more meat on the bones. And if the meat hangs on the bones in a funny way, that'll give me more information about how to restructure the bones for later. So let's see. The interesting path is this reject one that I haven't built yet. But if you do one of these, I think the first thing to do is to go and implement that much in the, oops. Okay. So we've got that. right, so looking again at the graph here, I arrive at the inn and I take the tavern path, then I stay at the inn. Okay. Now if I take the reject path, that's the other one that I wrote there. The name of this going to be, this is like this is the Decline Tavern. I should really begin establishing my preferred discipline for naming on certain things. That's another issue which has nothing to do with the story engine itself and more to do with practicing using it. You know, it's possible that as I build this, I'm actually building something that's more useful than what I know how to take advantage of, which is an interesting difficulty. If I practice it enough that I get used to it, I lose the ability to critique it. But if I don't practice at all, I fail to really evaluate its usefulness. I'm not sure how to deal with that. That like paradox of system design. Let's see. This will be the Tavern Decline. Tavern Decline, right? And so we have this new string I need to write here. QUS Tavern Decline.c. Tavern, right? Okay. Tavern Decline is going to be like, she's going to be talking to you. She's going to say, All right, so she charged you $1, even if you want to stay without drinking. And now she's told you that. So you get new options. Now, the other issue is if I give you the option to leave, what path does that take? Right, if you're here in Tavern, you do Tavern Decline. Well, I haven't actually wired up Tavern Decline. But Tavern Decline is going to be recreation of that state. So you can stay, go to the inn, or to camp, it says. Yeah. Don't love that. I could just go for it for now and clean this up later. It's part of the design issue I haven't got an answer to yet. So let me talk this out. I know we're writing, but this is sort of a this is not a computation model or data structure design issue as much as it's a design issue with the interactive fiction content itself. So my big vision here is that there's this like phase of the game called evening, and there's a set of options that you have for how to spend an evening whenever you're in town. And like once you're like into the game, once you're like past the intro, that set of options is just based on what you know, how much you can afford to spend, and that's about it, right? You just pick one of them. So you could be like, you know, it's evening time. How do you want to spend your evening? And you'd be like, go to the tavern and get an ale, or go to the tavern and pay for a stool seat, right? Like whatever. Or go to the inn and sleep for the night, or go camp, right? You just pick one, and it's not like that's it. There's no going through the dialogue. It's sort of like as if all of those details got edited out. So in chapter 1, our character and our player are meeting the town, and we're not skipping over the sort of early interactions. Those early interactions might also be places where we have opportunities to fill in more than what I've got so far. Like these characters might not just be vendors for game mechanics. They might also be characters that you have a relationship with that can evolve in the story. And if I decide to go that way, then seeds of that relationship narratively can fit into this time in town. Even if I don't put it there, if this is just the part of the game where you are spending the most time in town, after this you don't spend as much time in town very often. You have like shorter passes through town. from then on, and it's also just narratively the first time the character is in town, so they are going through the process of learning where things are, how things work, and stuff like that. And so I like the feeling that I like the I don't like the feeling that it gives me when I write down sort of this sort of what the prototype looked like. The first time you drop into combat, it just drops you right away into like the most bare bones thing. You encounter a rat. What do you do? Oh, do you fight it or do you guard? But maybe the first encounter with the rat should have the exposition of what the rat is like and give you some ideas of how it makes you feel. How big are we talking about when we say rat? Is this any danger to me or not? That kind of thing, right? Same thing when you encounter other stuff that is more dangerous than the dungeon rats, right? Um, and so that way it feels more like early on new stuff to you is being told to you like a story, and you're interacting with it in more fine-grained detail. But then I kind of want to get to a point where you've seen that, you're still going through you're still logically making certain moves, like you're paying the money for the ale or for the spot at the inn. So you're paying the price, you're getting the benefits of your purchase in the game mechanics, but you don't have to go through all the stages. If there's no, if there's nothing, if the game has nothing to introduce into the narrative, right? If the narrative itself does not hinge on an interaction that you have with the innkeeper or with the bartender at those times, then it's just providing the game mechanic, right? It sort of passes through quickly, and that way it's still gameplay, but we're not like belaboring the point. It's like it becomes an efficient, streamlined interface for decision making through gameplay. And early on, it's not that, because there's narrative relevance. And later on, if narrative relevance resurges in one of these places, then we would want to override the efficient path with the new narrative information anyways, right? So one of the problems I want to deal with is I have things like the logic for how much it costs to get an ale, and I'm having the issues regarding um, where that lives. So right now the logic lives right here, but later on it's going to need to live. A copy of the same logic is going to live somewhere else, because I'm going to have the streamlined version where you don't actually go to the tavern and have a conversation. Maybe try to walk away and get some more information, and then make the same decision again, but with new options. Instead, you'll have all the options that you know about in one go. But I don't want to have to duplicate that logic, the cost check here, or the details about how to actually play that move out. I kind of want to be able to unify some of that. Maybe not all of it, but some of it. And how I do that might come down to the answer to the question, how do I do that, might be that I have to do it through changes to the compute structure, which I don't want to get into, or by getting outside of the story graph, right? Maybe instead of having an evening for the story graph, I need something with a little bit more smarts. Like I need to write a program that looks at your options and which ones you've played out and which ones you need to still play out in order to put them into your streamlined interface, right? But that's not. That's all like programming heavy questions. There's a slightly different question, which is the interface here in those early phases, right? So coming back to that topic of, we have a streamlined version of the interface for deep into the gameplay where you just want a good interface, but you have this more elaborated interface. It is less streamlined, more elaborated for the narrative moment of introducing these new elements. And when I say introducing these new elements, I kind of mean introducing the elements of the narrative and introducing the elements of the game mechanics. Um, when it's in that early phase where I want things more elaborated, there are these weird, annoying situations where there's still a lot of options of choices of what a player could do, and they're showing up now in as like they come across as like these weird like um almost, I mean, they're clunky no matter which way you put them together, and there's a couple ways you can imagine putting them together. So let me like spell this out for you, because I'm kind of just talking out loud about the game design here. The one way you can do it is you can railroad the player a little bit intentionally and say like, okay, what do you want to do? Do you want to go find an inn or go find a tavern? If you know, and if you go to the inn, then you might hear the price of staying at the inn and decide that it's too expensive, and say, well, I'm already committed to going to sleep. So like you've set out to go to sleep when you said you went to the inn. So now we railroad you and you have to go camping. You can't now decide, oh, if this is that pricey, then I'm gonna go to the tavern. Right? I don't. So you can railroad it so the player's not switching back and forth, right? But here I run into a situation where, um, the downside to that, right? So that works and that solves the problem I'm about to talk about. It has its own problems. It feels weird, right? It feels weird when like, say you are a person who's played this game a couple of times and you know that the strategy you'd like to go with to get the game started is to camp outside of town. You've decided that you don't want to spend money at the tavern or at the inn on the first day. You want to camp outside of town. That's the strat you're going to play. And so you want to do that, but in order to do that through the elaborated story interface, you have to do this thing of go to the inn, say never mind once you've heard the price, and then you can go camping, right? It's like you have to go fairly roundabout. You have to get there through the story. And getting there through the story is fine when it's all completely fresh and new, but if it's also supposed to be replayable, it starts to be a little bit annoying, because getting to camping wasn't like it was gated on something. It wasn't like you needed to, it wasn't like the reason you couldn't go straight to camping was that it was not guaranteed that you would even achieve that state, or that there's a price to camping that is rather elaborate, that it has to be worked out in a particularly interesting way that isn't just you say camp and then it happens. But if you had a situation where you were gonna do some elaborate like dialogue tree or something that wasn't necessarily the same every game, or that that wasn't a matter of just picking a sequence of options, but was a matter of like permuting things that weren't. A lot of this especially makes sense if it's like the interface of clicking through things can't capture it. So like if you have to arrange how to like a bunch of if you have to arrange a bunch of circumstances, like I keep coming to the idea of permuting things, and by permuting I can mean like pairing things off too. So like, say you've got a horse. This isn't in this story, but say you have a horse and you can either put the horse at the stable or keep it with you, and you've got a bunch of belongings and you can either drop the belongings in a safe or keep them with you, and you could go to the tavern first or not before you go camping, right? There's all these options you have. So that's not quite a permutation, but it's sort of getting close where there's all these separate choices you could make. Even then, I feel like all of those are, if you went straight to camp, it wouldn't be a problem. But you could imagine being a little bit more if we got a little bit more creative, there are other scenarios where you have to deal with something else first. You have to do something with the horse. It's either going to go to the stable or you have to let it go. So that decision has to be resolved before you can make a decision about going to camp. Then it would make sense that you can't go straight there, right? This is the kind of thing I was trying to manufacture. But on the flip side, right? So if I can't get straight to the option once I've played a couple of times, it starts to feel like I have to weave through the narrative in a sort of obtuse way. And the only reason, that it might end up that way is that, like, maybe day one I hadn't thought of sending the player to go camping as one of their beginning of the game options. But and that sort of is true, that's why it wasn't included right away. It was like, go to the inn or go to the tavern. And then later I was like, oh, when they go to the inn, I do want there to be a price to the inn. It's a part of the narrative that to keep staying here, you have to be making money. And so I either need to say that if you run out of money, that's game over, or that there's like a worse fallback option. There's a downside to not spending the money to go to the inn. And I kind of just felt like, well, let's press on the story engine and see how it holds up when I have another option here. And the thing I'm running into now is that in the process of figuring out which path the player should be able to take at the beginning of the game, I want them to be able to go to camp, like go camp right away is their choice if they want. I feel like that's the design I want, given the current thinking I have. And yet, there's like a thing where a new player's experience might be that they arrive, they see their options, they see that they can go to a tavern, an inn, or they can go camping. They might go check out the tavern, see the prices, and go, you know what, I want to leave. Go check out the inn, see the prices, and go, I want to leave. And then end up at camp by default. And so, like, all that sounds fine. But the issue becomes in places like this where you're in the tavern. This also happens at the end, but I'm going to use the tavern since that's the one we were just writing. You're in the tavern, and you can take one of the options that have you staying at the tavern, and then there's an option, and then there's the stuff that isn't staying at the tavern. So once you were in the streamlined interface, you wouldn't have had the conversation. You wouldn't be narratively inside this tavern talking to this person, right? You would just be in the streamlined interface deciding how to spend the evening. And there you would just say, like, oh, get an ale, get the spirits, pay for the seat at the bar, and don't drink, right? Go camping, go stay at the inn, right? These are your options, pick one. That would be fine. But here, it's a little funny if I give you the option to be like, oh, the bartender has just explained to you the rule that if you're going to stay at the bar, you at least have to pay for the seat. And you can now agree to that. You can ask for an ale anyway. You can ask for spirits anyway. Or you can go camping or go to the inn. Right? That part is a little weird. And so it makes me feel like what I should do here is have another step where you can say you want to leave, and then that takes you outside. And then you can go camping or go to the inn. And I guess that all of that is fine. Like, as I say that, maybe that's not that big a deal from the perspective of the early interface. It's just that it's so tempting to, like, if you go and look how I structured this, it's like I already said that the path is, well, when you're in the tavern decline state, you might want to go to the inn or go to camp. And it's true, but really I want there to be an intermediate so that the flow of narrative and interaction here clicks a little better. And the clunkiness of that, the extra step that feels unnecessary, is going to go away in the streamlined interface. And so, I don't know, maybe I'm just getting torn between thinking about in my head how the streamlined interface would feel better to play with while still building the elaborated one or something. I don't know, but it feels some of it feels like I'm not quite happy with how it's gelling together. Okay, so let's keep elaborating. So you're at the tavern. I guess there is one other downside to this, which is if my plan is that you as the player have to go through these elaborated interfaces in order to unlock the streamlined interface. You have to go through them once at the beginning of the game to set up the narrative lines there. I could see that getting annoying. There might be such a thing as like you've played once before and so you just get started right away at the streamlined interface. Like, how would it feel if you started playing your 5th run of the day and it was like, all right, now I got to decide, am I going to go to the tavern? Am I going to go through go to the tavern, go to the inn, and then decide what I want to do just to unlock the interface? Or am I going to is the game just going to be like, oh, I see you're a returning player, so you just start with the returning interface. Hey, you've arrived at town, what do you want to do? And it's like you automatically know your options because the options aren't changing all the time, right? These are fixed game mechanics. And so you don't play out the narrative. But what if... Yeah, it gets weird because if you give the option, if you're set the expectation that you drop right into the streamlined interface as a part of the plan to make it work. If the plan for me is that I'm saying this will feel good because on your second playthrough you'll see the streamlined interface, that precludes any attaching of relevant information into the narrative of this intro later. But if I hold off forever and don't build that in, that could make it hard to design. So I don't know. It's a little bit of a stumper how I want to do that. Anyway, if you're in the Tavern Decline, yeah, I also have that Tavern Arrive can go to inn or camp. I don't actually see that happening either. So let's say that yeah, why don't we do it like this? Evening begin. I might, if we reject again, we go to evening begin again. And so when we start off right away, when we're in the inn arrive, instead of going to camp, we can reject to go to evening begin, so we can go back. So maybe this is the right kind of solution. We go back. So the elaborated tree, interesting. All right, I'm gonna take a 5-minute break for the bathroom. All right. Okay. Begin. All right. If you stay at the tavern, that's when we'll apply the rule that it is now nighttime. When afterwards, like you stay at the tavern in the evening. So whatever you do next is past evening, it's fully night. And we have if we begin, if you stay at the tavern, I don't know exactly how, but eventually you have to continue to something like night begin. So tavern arrive, tavern stay. And if you get to nighttime, then the only paths left are in and camp outside. Something like that, maybe. And no, these are not early bedtime. We could figure out whether you have an early bedtime or not based on if it's evening or night when you do the sleep action, actually. So that could be simplified now. But anyway. Okay. So any of these now become available. And you can leave and you end up here. Now, let's go back to in, arrive. Call that reject, and then you are going to end up outside. Okay. You can get lodging in and in. Begin preparations tomorrow. You could pitch your tent outside of town and begin preparations tomorrow. Let's rearrange that now. No, not tavern. Town, arrive. There we go. Town option I want to put it, or tavern option I want to put first. Visit a tavern. Stay at an inn. camp outside of town. Okay. And a paragraph on those as well. Well, the bartender says, if you want to stay, I ask that you pay 1 denaro for the stool you'll be using. Do you agree? Agree to pay for the stool. Visit a tavern. Politely decline. Agree to pay for using the stool. Ale. Spirits. Leave. Evening begin. Now you go to inn, camp, or tavern. You return to the tavern. The bartender asks for your order. Then nothing shows up. Okay, that's because you need to put these here. Now what I want to do is have an interesting little gadget here. You have to learn about the bar stool thing, the cover charge thing, the fact that you don't get to stay and mingle for free. Tavern bar stool rule. Okay. So what happens is, if you don't know about the bar stool rule, then your character has to go through this. Otherwise, they can And so you don't know about it until, how do we set that to, when do we set that to true? We set that to true after the first time you've gone into the tavern decline state. At the tavern decline state, that's where bar stool rule Twitter from int. Visit a tavern, ask for an ale, continue, camp outside. I wake up the next morning, I do some morning stuff, I do some afternoon stuff. The evening begins, I go to the tavern again, I ask to stay and talk with the patrons. Gotta make that not line wrap. Well, the bartender says, if you want to stay, I ask that you pay 1 dinar for the stool you'll be using. Alright, leave, go to camp, wake up. Alright. Cool. So, what's next? Let's do that line wrap issue real quick. Ask to stay and and talk, pay the charge. Okay. Okay, cool. So that's nice, but if we play through here, visit the tavern, play decline. Oh, if you want to stay. All right, agree to pay for using the stool. Now there's nothing here. So this is the next spot for me to write. All right, this is developer mode. If that's not obvious, it's this when you see these like sort of code labels for the current state and the actions available, those are just derived from the graph. It's a way to like scaffold up so I can use the graph to sort of get things started, but I have to go in and fill it in with the detailed writing to make it actually, do the game version, the real game. So I feel like I'm gonna like this more when there's not big walls of text and I have like page turning, because you like see this and there'll be like a sound for this little snippet that you're going through the dark. Page turn. And if you don't need the page turns, if you're trying to play quick, you can just skip or see a summary or something. I don't know. Interesting. Okay, so okay. Let's actually back up and do this one real quick too. This one gets skipped over by the beginning of the game. So at the very beginning of the game, you get a chance to go to the inn, go camping, or go to the tavern without actually noticing that there's a node here in this graph, basically without seeing this one. But if you go somewhere and then leave that place, you end up seeing it. And then later passes through the day-night cycle. It's possible you'll see it then. Just reordering things a little bit because I've decided that it makes more sense to say that, yeah, the tavern stuff comes before the inn or camping stuff. Okay. So okay, where to go next? Yeah, so we're writing evening begin. How should this look? If you're here, it'll be kind of like the town arrives string. That's like, it's not quite dark, but it will be soon. I need that extra space on the main panel. Yeah, okay. These don't need to push the evening graph because they're already in it. They just do the tavern move. Which is interesting. All right, so if I play, visit a tavern, politely decline. No, I don't want that. Visit the inn, decline, go back to the tavern. Oh. This one isn't right. It's probably wrong over here too. Leave bar stool purchase. Okay. That's got to be if is greater than bar stool. This has to be if you can afford this. Right. Okay. Now how does it go? Visit the tavern. Decline. I can leave tavern. Leave. Leave tavern. Leave. Okay, so when I say leave, right, if you do reject, we want to look at the evening graph here. If you're in the tavern arrive state and you do the reject path, it says go to tavern decline. What I want to have is a rule that says if you're in the tavern decline state and you've already heard about Okay. Let's do this. I'm going to use a different verb for actually leaving the tavern than for the ones that take you into the decline state. Okay. And then here in the graph, you go from in arrive to, here in the graph, in the in tavern arrive state, reject isn't the one that takes you here, it's the continue. Reject will take you all the way out to evening begin. So if I go in, tavern, decline, leave, tavern, leave, tavern, leave. Okay. Now, as I said, here's the next bit where I could do some writing. So you stay at the tavern. My goal here for this bit is if you stay at the tavern, from the perspective of the gameplay, the advantage is that you get opportunities to advance relationships with certain characters in town. Now, there's only one character relationship that I have already got specifics in mind for, so that's what I'm going to do here. But the other mechanic I have in mind is that there's this one I have in mind is always sitting here at the tavern in the evening, and that's representatives of the Dungeon Guild who you can hire to escort you to the dungeon if you want. It's one of the paths you can take. And so you can come here and meet them. And after you've met them, you know how to hire them. You have to meet them once. And this is one of the places where you can meet them. The other thing that can happen is that you, instead of talking to these people who are always an option, you get random characters who, will basically be chosen completely by RNG. I don't have any of those other characters in mind specifically yet, although I know that there are things that will come up over time. I just haven't developed any of those characters. So, can't put any of those in. That would be the other thing you could do here, is once you've paid the charge either for a drink or to stay at the bar and mingle, that you would look around and you'd see an opportunity to talk to someone you don't know. Or if you recognize one of the characters, to go and talk to them. And whenever you do, there's, it's possible that meeting someone or talking to someone is advancing one of the subplots of the relationship between you and that character or group of characters, whatever exactly it is, right? So for now, I think I'll just write this as if there's not any more decisions to make. You stay at the tavern. And the other thing is, so there's these 3 different options to get a drink, to get the spirits, or to just get the stool cover charge. And my plan there is if you get any kind of drink, then you will have, so there's a big mechanic in the game is going to be stamina and fatigue and sleep. And when you drink before you sleep, it will give you a small penalty to that system, right? You'll wake up sleeping. This is why there's also the inn versus camping. Camping saves you a bunch of money, but staying at the inn maxes out your capacity for stamina for the day. Similarly here, mingling has the advantage of giving you the opportunity to advance relationships. If you drink, though, there's a disadvantage to that stamina system. That's part of the plan. But the advantage is the more you paid for a drink. So if you just got the bar stool, you get the minimum advantage, right? You get a chance to mingle, but you have minimized it. If you get a drink, it goes a little more, and if you get the stronger drink that costs a little bit more, then you get the most like social benefits in this environment from that. So that's the game design plan. I think for now I'll just write one path through this because I don't have a stamina system yet anyway. I don't have the other characters for you to advance with. There's not a whole lot, but I can flesh this out and make more like the other alternate paths based on what that actually reminds me. There was one other thing I wanted to do while I was setting this up. So when you right here, I set this up so that when you do the purchase, it looks at the key, charges the cost on you. It should also remember what do I want to call this? It's tavern because you're in the tavern. It's the maybe like the ticket that you bought to get into the tavern. The key because it's a game key. The purchase key because it's the key of what you purchased. The purchased key. It also matches the fact that we call it a tavern purchase. So tavern purchase key. Right, so when you do the tavern purchase, one of the things that happens is the tavern purchase key gets remembered. That way we will be able to, from within the tavern, the stay in the tavern interactions, check and see how much of a boost you get to your sociability check or whatever. Okay. Tavern stay. For now, that's just going to be some text that we supply. I can imagine that building out into quite a significant subsystem of the game itself. But there we go. There's where we start. We'll go ahead and rely on that tavern purchase key right up front because we're kind of flowing off of that, right? You just made the purchase. So some some amount of recognition that you of what just happened in the story seems appropriate. I also probably want. Do I have a tavern stay counter yet? Purchase visit counter? No, I don't have the stay counter. So this will be the block for if the game state tavern stay counter equals 1. So this is for your first stay. And then otherwise, it's like this. Okay. How do I want to build up to this? This is not the right thing, but it's a good start. Lame. Super lame. I love it. Yeah, we'll just keep this line like that since it's equivalent everywhere. Probably gonna rework some of that, but it gets us started. So the big idea here is that here is your first visit. You don't know anybody. So here I think for now I can just assume you don't know anybody. What would happen if I build the system out better, like over time, is the next thing that happens, right here, we sort of, this is what happens on your first visit no matter what. We could create a sort of similar template here to see who is here tonight. Who is here tonight? Who is here tonight? Right, so either way, you've gotten started here, and if it's your first time here, this is how you deal with the experience after your first time here. Let's say if it's your second time, and beyond will actually abbreviate more. And there we go. Okay. So, point being, these are the abbreviated versions. That you get when you've already been through this. I was talking about this a little before, but you have the elaborated experience and the streamlined experience later. So now, like I said, once there's a bigger system here, it'll get more interesting. But if you don't know anyone in town at all, then I think what would happen is someone from the Dungeon Guild will come up and introduce themselves. That's how this will get started. There's another way this could go. Is I could say that you have a conversation with the bartender first. If you got like depending on what path you're on here. So like maybe by buying a drink, maybe by buying a stool, you don't elicit as much conversation from her. But by buying a drink, she'll point you in the right direction, and that might take the conversations down a little different path. If I want to design, the upsides to taking these paths. Right now, this is the only path with the downside is it costs one more of the currency. But if I add another downside for both of these in the stamina system, then I'll start looking for like, okay, how am I going to add the benefit, the trade-off for taking this path. I'm going to put this one first because it's sort of in the spectrum of downsides and upsides. This has the fewest downsides and the fewest upsides, and this has the most downsides and the most upsides, right? So that they make a nice spectrum sort of thing. But for now, I'm just going to say there is no knowledge system. It's not going to check if you know the Dungeon Guild or not. It's not going to check if there's someone else in the bar who you know or who you don't know, who you could meet. Instead, it's just going to drop you right into the interaction where someone from the Dungeon Guild approaches you and introduces you to the Dungeon Guild. And that way I can at least write that piece of the story, and then later that piece of the story will get sort of sectioned off and put into its the context where it does occur rather than being hard-coded into this. But I don't want to have to do the whole structure of the tavern stay yet. So I want to somehow say that he was with a group of he was with a group of people who all looked about his age or who all looked similar to him. I don't want to say they're rowdy. I picture this group of people more like they're having fun, but they're also, this is a group of people from the Dungeon Guild. They are specifically looking to, they're like salesmen. They're looking to sell their tour. So this group of individuals from the Dungeon Guild, the way that they operate is they are tough enough to, they know the way to the dungeon, and they are tough enough to handle the top floor of the dungeon. They can give people, they keep the top floor of the dungeon pretty well in check, and they offer tours to people traveling through who want to check out one of the dungeons. The top floor of the dungeon is usually rather uneventful. There's not a lot to loot there. Not much. Not the more dangerous stuff in the dungeon is deeper down, and so people, they offer this as like a way to raise money for the guild. So they're like young, enthusiastic salesmen. They're a little tough because they are able to handle the dungeon, but they're not. They're just fit. They're not the toughest people ever. So how do I want to describe them? When you first meet this group of people, we'll delay this. We'll put this. We'll say that he's with a group in a minute. All right, so here I'm just talking out loud, thinking through how to structure this part. What this character is used to experiencing is he's here to sell this tour of the dungeons to people who are passing through Deriba who maybe aren't there for that. But as it goes, if he goes out there and he works it, finds it, these people passing through are usually just traveling either east or west across the mountains and stopping at Deriba as a midway point on the journey. And some of those folks have some extra cash, or aren't in any rush, and are interested when they hear the pitch. Not everyone, maybe not even the majority of people that they approach, but they, the travelers who come through and go out and visit the tavern, or are out and about doing any other recreational things, might be just a little bit more up for adventure than just strictly on the road and no funny business. So they get some business. But in this case, a more rare situation has come up, which is someone who's actually come to see the dungeons, and they don't generally attract people. It's not that they never attract people, but the people they attract are usually like adventure parties, and you're traveling by yourself, right? You have the look of you of someone who's passing through, and so when they ask if you're from out of Deriba, it's because they expect that you're on the road, and to find out that you're actually there to see the dungeons means maybe this will be an easier sell than it would be if you were a traveler. So he's excited because he's likely going to be able to offer you this guidance to the dungeons, and to look around the first level of the dungeon. But I'm wondering how he's going to say this part. He wants to sell it to you that it's a good thing. So he's going to like, and this is where we'll explain the group he's with. So we'll describe them. All right, cool. So we got that far. Now, okay, there we go. That's better. You don't actually have to decide now. You decide the day after, the morning after tomorrow. If you go and meet them in town, the that's when they'll ask you to pay. Not right here. Okay. Um. All right, I'm gonna cut it off there. I definitely want to build this out. Definitely want to build this out more because my long-term plan for like how this whole thing will work is that there'll be a couple of characters in the Dungeon Guild that you get to know over time, and that you interact with, and that'll be pretty important. I haven't actually developed much of my plans for who the characters are. I have a couple of main character archetypes, but I need to do some character planning that I haven't done yet. So I think what I'll do is keep it simple for now, but it'll be something like that. It's a good sort of placeholder rough draft. Now this might have a couple problems. This might not fit on the screen. I've got a lot of gaps here, which might be good. And the reason that might be good is one of the things I want to do next time I work on the engine is to work on my options for how to lay things out and display things. And this will be one of the points where there's like, this would help to challenge that system, give me ways of testing out if I like this or if I want to break it up into pages or have like a scrolling option or what. So I don't know exactly what it would be right now, but that will be a good test case. And then let's figure out what the button will say. So all that happens, and then all right. For this tavern arrive, yeah, we want to grab these guys. Now let's open that. And let me check the graph. When you are in the tavern stay state, and you do continue, you go to the night begin. Okay. Go in there, visit the tavern, have an ale. Just barely fits on this big tall screen of mine. It wouldn't fit on my laptop screen. So yeah, that's fine, but I wanna do a few things. I wanna do things to I also have this like annoying double period thing. I should go back and fix all the spots where I did it that way. That's just like period backslash quote means I don't need the period because those are that funny case where a sentence ends at the end of a quote. Looks a little better if you don't keep the quote in. Ale. This is weird. With your drink in hand, you... Okay, there is another issue. We have that counter there. I never actually set that up. So let's go over here to the evening graph. When we... do... When we do tavern stay, that's where we want to do an increment on the tavern stay counter. N17M, you haven't been here in a few streams. Any big updates? What's the last stream you saw? Have you been watching the Story Engine stuff? I apologize if you've been in chat before and I'm blanking on. I just can't remember if you're. I don't know if you're referring to the Sat Solver stuff I was streaming or the Story Engine stuff that I've been streaming. Oh, were you here when I was first starting up the engine for all this back when it was a 7-day roguelike um entry back at that time? Yeah, okay, cool. That's right. Okay, so a lot has happened. So I submitted it to the 7-day roguelike. I don't know if you haven't seen that version, I can show it off real quick. Um, let's see. How am I gonna find this dashboard here? Ready? Here we go. Here it is. So there's this version where you go in and you can explore the dungeons. You've got some stats, and you can explore, you can rest, you can find items, you can fight things. So that turned out all right. It's kind of cool, and it did help me understand what was and wasn't going to work. This version here is I've done a couple of weeks of iterating on building a more structured way to contain the story elements so that I can't, because the big feeling I got out of the 7-day roguelike version was that there was no it went from your just going through these hand coded states of the displaying intro to the game, and then just plops you right inside the dungeon where you're basically playing like a turn-based RPG with also outside of the turn-based RPG you make a few different random decisions about or a few different decisions about how to explore, which leads to random encounter. So you kind of have some decisions that control the random encounter parameters a little bit. Like if you explore quietly, you get less encounters per discovery, but if you explore quickly, you spend less time doing the same amount of exploration. So you don't take you don't take down your stamina, or your fatigue doesn't take up as fast. The So that was cool, but it was very much just a tight little game loop at that point, and no story stuff. So it was like strictly like railroad story, fixed story mode stuff, hard cut to game loop. And I'm really working on trying to blend the narrative telling stuff and the gameplay stuff more carefully, so that you get this more gradual shift from story elements coming at you to, as you interact with those story elements, you learn how to navigate them as a game mechanic, and then you start pulling at those narrative threads as the core gameplay itself. And there do need to be game loops in there, but they need to be built out of these more story things. They need to be stitched together using story telling structures, and they need to have their building blocks be storytelling structures, but I need to interweave gameplay loops too. So I've been working on things that I think will make that more possible, and iterating on how to write stuff in the system. So we're now in this state where I arrive in town, and I'm not even doing any RPG battling or anything like that. You don't even get to the dungeon in the game yet, except in the very simplest sense of the word. You can get to the dungeon inside the developer outline version of the first act. But I'm really fleshing out this chapter 1 stuff and trying to build out the interplay between the storytelling system and the gameplay system, and how to author that. And so you get stuff now where you can go to the tavern. You get your first time exploring the town. This is your first time navigating through the town. You get this paragraph. If we explore some more after this, we will never see this paragraph again. This is only something you see at the beginning of the run, as it sort of says it's flavor about what it's like walking around in town. And then this is a flavor that you get for the first time coming to the tavern. So we're getting these things that are narrative narrative building blocks automatically. So that's just a small bit of flavor. Um, and here we get our first interaction with the bartender, and she's saying we got to buy ale or spirits, and it's going to cost us money. And there's money in the game, and you can't see there's no character sheet implemented yet in this version. And I can do something like I can say, I don't want to spend the money, and she says, well, if you want to stay, you at least need to pay a charge just for the space that you'll be taking up. So you can then say like, oh, I'm going to agree to that, and then you stay. And see, we have this issue now where I need to update the engine because it's a big wall of text. You get approached by someone from the Dungeon Guild who's going to tell you how you can join them on their next trip out to the dungeon so that you find your way more easily and have them show you around. So this is sort of the reward you get. You came to the tavern, you spent the money. There's more subtle details of how I want there to be pros and cons of the choices you make at the tavern and more possible benefits. But I'm still just sketching out the bare bones structures here, and you can see like I have more fundamental issues like better options for controlling the layout and pacing of big pieces of text. But luckily I can still click it in this moment. I could click leave the inn. Now we're outside. We're now in developer mode, so I haven't written anything for this. But from here I can decide, am I going to go outside of town and camp? Am I going to go to the inn to sleep? And then if I go to the inn to sleep, I get some more. I can also be like, I'm not going to go to the inn. I end up here. So this is an issue. How did that happen? When I was I shouldn't be able to go back to the tavern. When you go to the tavern and then leave, time passes. It goes from evening to night. In the night mode, you cannot go to the tavern anymore. That is removed from the options. So, and it's a little annoying because like night is contained here inside of evening, and maybe that's a part of the problem. Like maybe I should have a separate entire subgraph for this. So I'm still working out the best way to order and write these, but right now what I'm doing is I'm just kind of pushing content into the system as it exists to strain it on purpose. And then I can use the strain that the system is under to evaluate the trade-offs of different structuring mechanisms. Okay, so what happened here was we went to the inn and we did reject, and that took us to evening begin. Yeah. What were some of I said I was learning more about what's going to work and what isn't going to work. So there's sort of different dimensions to this question. So in terms of game design, and then there's the same question in terms of the programming. So I learned a lot about what's not going to work in the programming. I had a very clunky sort of like the day one stuff was just very strict story, like, interactive fiction style thing where you have a state and some options that are written into that state, and those options take you to other states. And so I started with that, and I had the programming just centered around like, here's the current thing you're showing, and that current thing has clickable buttons which change what the current thing you're showing is. And programming it that way has too many limitations. It's really hard to figure out, like, if you want to have like a combat mode and an exploration mode and transitional text and all these different things. Like if you want to say like, oh, you're entering the second layer of the dungeon, let's give you a moment. Let's describe for a moment how it got a little darker and how now that you're in the second layer of the dungeon, the walls have become the pattern of the brick walls and their state of decay has become familiar to you, and looks the same as it did before, but it's gotten darker. And you want a bit of flavor text. It sounds better than what I just said, but some kind of flavor text to that effect. And then you want to, from that flavor text, have like combine in um, a decision about what the initial thing you are faced with in the second layer of the dungeon is going to be. It just and that decision is systematic. That is gameplay. So that first piece is flavor text that is unique to this portion of your descent into the dungeon. And on the same screen, you want to bring in a piece that is from the core game loop, saying like, how are you going to start exploring, or you are immediately assailed by this enemy you haven't seen before, and how do you deal with it, or whatever it's going to be. And maybe there's a random element, so this has to be chosen ahead of time by some kind of game engine logic. It just turned out that like piecing things together the way I wasn't good enough. And what I'm working on now also isn't good enough, but it's got a lot of properties that make it better. So I'm building these explicit story graphs, and then I can like make a stack of them. And so as I go into one layer, I can then say like, okay, go into your, like, let me show you this. This is cool. So here is the graph for Act 1, and it's essentially like an outline of the Act 1 story. This is the things you can do and how the states you can get into, right? And then right now I'm the reason there's not a lot of content attached here is I am writing Chapter 1. Everything I've done in this prototype is here building out what you can do in town when you first arrive. So this is your first time in town. There are other times you can get into town. You can get into town here. And so a lot of stuff that I'm building now could get reused here, right? The decisions about what places you can go to, the like learning about who's in town and what's in town and all that. Very similar here as here, although I want to have separate flavor text. So they're separate states in the graph now. And you can see here I'm pushing on the arrive in town subgraph. And so when you arrive in town, you get this. You arrive, it's evening. You can't see this. I actually have a note how it's a little bit funny how you enter in, and it's like the evening mode of being in town. The options are based on the time of day. And so at evening, the things you can do are available to you, but it's hidden because there's like it attaches in a slightly weird way. So there's some issues with how this is structured that I'm not entirely sure how I want to resolve, but it's actually in here, but it's hidden. It's hidden inside of this part of the buttons inside this fancy string actually. The So like this structuring is cool though because it allows me to start having better reuse of story graphs. So before, everything that was reusable was like this classical RPG game loop, and everything that was story graph was like outside of that, strictly story graph. It was really hard to see like a balanced fusion of them, and so I had cuts between them that were pretty stark. Now I'm starting to build this machine, I call it the story machine or the story engine, where you build these story graphs, but you can also start programming with those story graphs, so you can reuse them and tweak their behavior. So here, the reason this hides the evening, even though it's that's what's going on, is that this intro string gives a different initial flavor text. It gives a different sort of set of pages and setup for the decision than what you normally get. Then another cool piece of all this is there's these, how do I want to show this? I'm trying to think. So like you can see, I have these things called counters. So there's when you visit the inn, there's a counter, and when you stay at the inn, there's a counter. And so if we go over and look at like what happens when you arrive at the inn, if you're arriving at the inn for the first time, I can like automatically show you something different than if you've arrived at the inn before. I show you something different. If you've never stayed at the inn, so if the inn stay counter is 0, the innkeeper will tell you about the price in a slightly different way. His wording is different. So now all of this text can just sort of automatically adjust to the systematic gameplay stuff. And then there's also things like when you stay at the inn, it can check if you've got the money. So we had stuff like this before, but what we didn't have before that we have now is that we can also are controlling things like, let's see, if you stay at the end. There's a sub around here somewhere. I don't know where it is. Yeah, you can see like right here attached to the story graph. If you go to this point and you stay at the inn, then you don't have to remember to program it on the buttons that take you to this state. Instead, you just say, oh, whenever the player enters into this state, subtract the cost of staying at the inn from what the player has. So I'm building up these systems that are more programmable, that interconnect ways of writing interactive story like story graphs with ways of programming, with ways of interacting with like game state for stuff that is outside of the game graph. Yeah, so if you're interested in all this, I started a new YouTube channel for myself called Mr. Forth Unscripted. So I have another YouTube channel called Mr. Forth Programming, and I haven't done any content there about this. Mr. Forth Programming is this one. I do like podcast interviews and video essays and projects there. Here on Mr. Forth Unscripted, I'm just taking like development logs that are raw design process stuff, what's working, what's not. So if you look at like this architecture analysis, this is where I analyze the programming architecture that I kind of just described to you some of the problems. I kind of just described to you some of the same things I described in this video, but this is just me thinking out loud to myself, not to a Twitch stream, just to myself, but into a mic to share on YouTube later, about what was limiting about the programming in the first prototype. Here I do the same thing again, but thinking about the game design issues that I was running into, and that's where I talk about. I also shared some of that just now, but like the hard cutoff I had in the first game prototype, where there was like some story steps, you enter the dungeon, and then this hardcore game loop takes over, and there's no feeling of story inside this. There's no feeling of game loop inside this, and I want to, instead of having a switching back and forth, I'm looking for the feeling of the core game loop being the story graph, and the story graph having game loops inside of it, sort of fully fused equal partners in the experience, right? And so I explained that a little bit here, and there's more videos that'll come out on this already. So yeah, if you like hearing me think through the design of this, that's where I'm sort of taking audio notes on what's working, what's not working, and how I'm trying to make progress and explore the possibilities here. So like here, today I'm kind of doing the same thing, but most of this will end up in one of those logs at some point, separately from me chatting about it with Twitch here, and yeah, like a big thing that I need to figure out that is not clicking in this iteration now is that the graph is helpful at first, but over time, I am finding that as I work with it, like the graph is helpful on day one and it structures things nicely. But after a few days, I start arriving at structures that want to get outside of the graph and that don't really fit the graph. And I don't have a good transition path for that. So like right now I'm overloading the graph with a few things. There's like, okay, after you've been to the tavern, you go into the night mode, and in the night mode, you should not be able to go back to the tavern, which you can't, but then you can go to the inn, and when you're at the inn, if you're at the inn and you leave, it takes you to the beginning of the evening, but that shouldn't be possible. It should take you to the beginning of night. So like these logical things that are sort of, I could, if I had a visual editor, it would help too, but I want to not have to have two nodes that say in, which is probably what I have to do, unless, like, because you see there's so much content and programming attached to each of the nodes already that if I have two separate in nodes, then I have to duplicate all this stuff. So the issue becomes, okay, well, I think when we leave the inn, It's saying I go to evening begin, but maybe sometimes that's wrong. Maybe sometimes it needs to go to night begin, and how do I sometimes go somewhere else? Tavern in camp. So I have a way to hack it. Let me show you how I can hack it for now. Evening begin can link to night begin through the continue verb. And then what we'll do is when we're in the in arrive and we do the reject path, we can go, okay, if game state, if the game state is what's the part I'm looking at? Time of day equals QU game key night. So if we've reached nighttime, then after we do that, we will automatically continue. So that means this, yes, takes me to I'm here, I do the reject verb, I end up in the evening begin, but then if it was nighttime when we were setting up this button, then we automatically go from evening to night before the player gets a chance to see. And we can put the night thing there, so we don't need it there. When you're at the tavern and you stay, then you have to go to night, to the night. When you reach night, then night goes there. Evening always goes to night automatically. And then we want to do the same thing over here. If you go, well, let's look at the graph. So yeah, it's a little bit hacked. I have to like put in a good deal of extra work to enforce this game rule that I feel like this is an important enough concept. I need to figure out better ways. Basically, this whole project is going to be when I come up to a thing like this where I have an idea for the story and the gameplay to go together, I have to figure out how you program it. And the story graphs helped me a bit, but I think that they have some big problems. And I need to figure out if the story graphs are going to stay or if I need to replace them. Maybe it's just that this layer needs to not be a story graph. I don't know. I'm thinking out loud a lot. I'm thinking out loud a lot at this point. Let's try to do this. I'm going to just get to the point where you can't cheat, where once you've gone to tavern, you're stuck at night, and I think I'll wrap the stream up for the day. I think that'll be it. Okay. How do you get to evening begin? One of the paths is right here. These are the other two paths. Okay, so tavern, arrive, reject. I didn't put it on the clipboard. And tavern, decline. There we go. N17M, I don't know. This isn't Vim. I don't use Vim. So if you're asking me how you do that in Vim, I couldn't tell you. All right. Visit a tavern. Get the ale. Oh man. If I get the ale, it doesn't fit on screen, so I better Visit a tavern, decline, agree to use the stool, and now it fits on the screen. Gotta fix that. What will you do? I use 4Coder for editing. This guy here. Or this guy here. 4Coder.net. Coder on itch. Okay, it took me outside to evening. That's not supposed to happen, right? I go in, I go to the tavern, decline, agree to take the stool, leave the inn. It takes me to, it's not quite dark, but it will be soon. That shouldn't be what I see. Evening begin. Let me see if I can understand. So I did tavern stay. That's why I got the big long string here. We did the continue. Tavern stay should have taken me to night begin. Oh, whoops, this has the data from evening begin. So it might have been I was on the right state, but it didn't look like it. What do order? Agree to pay. Leave the inn. Night. I go to the inn. I decline the room. Night. Okay, so that was the bug from before. I went to the inn. He told me the price, and I was like, nah, I don't want to pay, so I'm going to leave. And then it took me back to evening. Now it doesn't do that. Now when you try to go to the inn and leave, it takes you back to nighttime only. I've used Vim a little bit. You know, sometimes Git drops you into it, or just one of the better options that's available on Linux by default or something. And so I've used it a little bit. I'm not a huge fan. I know the very basics of like how to insert characters, how to delete characters, and how to save and quit. And that's about it. It's pretty bare bones. I've tried to learn the commands and stuff, and it's just not really, it doesn't really click for me. I haven't pushed super hard, but I also just don't feel that there would, I just don't, I don't know. I don't see the appeal of the command system in Vim. I know for some people, they say like once it clicks, it feels really good to edit that way, but it feels really it feels to me like the Vim commands are too much fun. Like they take up too much of my brain's power when I want to be thinking about the code I'm writing in the text file. I don't need a part of my brain going to the code that I'm writing to manipulate the text in the text file. Yeah, it's definitely not the worst thing at all to know. Like it can be useful to know Vim. I just don't care for it and I don't really find that I'm in any situations where knowing Vim would make a huge difference. Even in those places where like I get dropped into it by Git, those are usually to edit small text files, like commit messages basically. And when I'm in that situation where it's like I need something that runs on a Linux terminal, gedit is fine. It works pretty well for me too. and I usually avoid being like stuck in those situations for very long. Like I try to get back to being able to use FortCoder. All right, I think that this is good. I have loaded the system up pretty heavily with a lot of new content today. I did a lot off stream and we did some more on stream here. Stuff that'll push the front end engine, stuff that's going to push the compute model. This evening graph is clearly bad, and I want to think through how it got this way and why it's bad now, and what I should do with how this should actually be structured if a graph is correct and all that. I got to think about that in another context. Too sleepy right now. Been too much of a long day, so that'll come another time. But it's not something I could have gotten to the point. I could not have gotten to the point where I had these issues to deal with without pushing and forcing things into the current. If I don't push things through, I can't see how the thing breaks, right? So that is good. Very useful work to get done for the day. Anyone who's watching, thanks for coming and hanging out. I was showing this just a minute ago, but if you're interested in following my projects, a good place to go is on my YouTube channels. So there's, let me actually put the YouTube channel up. So there's Mr. Forth Unscripted, there's Mr. Forth Programming. There's also, for anyone who doesn't know, there's the stream archive over here where you can see me doing things that I literally have already done on Twitch. So if you miss a Twitch stream, they're all right here. And you can also read about my projects and follow news about things going on if you go to mrforth.com. And besides that, thanks for coming and hanging out. I will see y'all around. Bye.